Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story review. Well, this one is contained in the June 1974 issue of If, Worlds of Science Fiction. That's his name and the name of the story on the cover. Strangely, however, the artwork does not go to his story. So, there it is, featuring Isaac Asimov, Stranger in Paradise. Okay. So, it's on the table of contents. Oh, look, we haven't seen this in a long time. It has a little blurb right here in the table of contents. Okay, novelette Stranger in Paradise, Isaac Asimov, page 4, in which the redoubtable Dr. A demonstrates that just as a human being is more than a biochemical machine, so can a robot transcend the metallic. Okay, well, kind of got a few different motifs. Okay, now that I've read the story a couple times, I think I can make something of the artwork. Here's a robot. He's on some alien planet, supposed to be Mercury. And he looks like he's tripping or falling over, but is he really? Or even if he is that a problem? Maybe it's not. Tiny squib here reads, "Beauty is in the sensorium of the beholder." Okay. So, yeah, okay, I think I begin to see some of what this is. That the same story? No, that's not a story. Okay, that's the only artwork. So, there really seems to be kind of two different stories going simultaneously through this. The one, the more obvious one, is the story of these two brothers. But they live in a time where apparently being full-blood brothers, that is to say, sharing both parents, is something that's virtually unheard of. People don't do that. And here's this two guys. They've done it. I mean, they're born 5 years apart, but they're all grown up. The family resemblance between them, despite whatever minor differences one could point at, is undeniable. You see them together, and you could mistake one for the other until you look closely, and you can see one is 5 years younger, his hair's a little wavier, and the other, other little minor differences. People often say that I look like my brother, or I don't know. I look at him, and he doesn't really look. I mean, I guess I can see the family resemblance, but on the whole, I don't think I look like my brother a whole lot. But at any rate, they're more like each other. They share, obviously, a huge amount of the genome, sharing both parents. But they live in this bizarre culture where that is so weird, it's like they're ashamed of that fact. I've seen this before in other science fiction stories, not that anything specifically comes to mind, where you'd have some society where things are just arbitrarily different in some way. A whole culture that revolves around being something that would never make any sense among human beings, at least any of us ever lived so far. But we would usually tell the story around some particular individual who maybe doesn't quite fit into his own culture that well, because he'll be like us. So here are these two brothers. The bare fact of them being two brothers means they don't fit into a weird society where that's just weird, you see. But in that sense, they're like us. They are brothers. And even though socially in their society they're ashamed of that fact, it's kind of ridiculous. They could have just said, well, what an interesting little thing to get on with life. But it's not that simple. But they are, in other words, in that detail, they're like us. They are full flesh and blood brothers. Same mom, same dad. Apparently that was like, you don't do that in that society, but they have, their parents have, and here they are. So, beyond that, what have you got? You got two brothers separated as children. Apparently as very small children, they would have known each other. Then one goes away being 5 years older than the other. They have this thing called a creche or something. I think they call it that in a number of science fiction stories, though I seriously doubt that any science fiction author who employed that term to describe whatever people had a set of families has the faintest idea what in the world they're actually talking about. But okay, whatever. They shared a whatever, and but grew up and grew their different ways. Now these two brothers grew two very different ways. One went into human psychology and studies autism and how it causes it, and ultimately someday how to solve it. The other one studies telemetry and how to get information. So in two such widely separated fields, well, the older one also does one other kind of biological thing that in this society doesn't make a lot of sense. He discovers another experimental subject somewhere because he was autistic. And they were going to destroy him because cancel him. Yeah, canceling in this culture. And by cancel, i.e. dead. Oh, they'll do it painlessly. You just kind of go sleep softly and gently and never wake up. And then I guess your raw materials after that. But somehow he decides to rescue this descendant of his, son, I will just call it that, by some woman whose name you can't even remember. Okay, whatever, that's a little bit of that society. I'm going to call it a society. And for some bizarre reason, he decides he wants to experiment on that son, that child, that person, who's taken the name of Randall Nowan. Nowan, N-O-W-A-N, no one, because there's nobody. Yeah, well, okay. Autistic. He doesn't react well with the world around him. And apparently the interpretation of autism going around is that when you're autistic, it's because, you see all the same stuff any normal person would see, but it's like your brain doesn't approve of it. You don't trust it. So it's like rare that anything in the world really means anything to you, and it might be some very insignificant thing to most people that, for whatever reason, you can trust. So they kind of got their own ideas that, well, maybe your mind doesn't fit your body or something. That'll come back as a motif later on. So meanwhile, a lot of this story is about these two brothers suddenly finding themselves thrown together on a project that both have, in their very different areas of expertise, are able to contribute to. And if you're thinking you hear shades of another Asimov short story, one called Heredity, that goes way back to the early days when most of his stories that he wrote had to end up published in Astonishing Stories, in a very sympathetic place, run by his friend as the editor, Fred Pohl. Yes, there's definitely some similarities. As I said, each of the brothers with very different expertise are able to contribute to the situation. So what is the project? Well, they want to put this robot on Mercury. They don't yet have positronic brains able to fit into a tiny human cranium yet, but they can mimic it with a huge computer. I don't know, the size of half a room maybe. I don't know, big, way too big to carry around. And so they want to control it. And for some reason, they want to control it all the way from Earth while this thing walks around and does things on Mercury. So obviously you'll have to put some amount of smarts in the robot itself so that it can do simple things, make observations, walk, pick up specimens, do spectrographic analysis of the sunlight and its different parts of it. There's a prominence. Look at that. I can see there's a lot of hydrogen in there. See that, red spectral line, and on and on and on like that. Okay. They work on this project because they want the robot to be like a human being, sort of. They're trying to make a humaniform robot, basically. Even if it won't look all that human, it might look like the one in the artwork, but it's basically human form. Arms, legs, head, eyes in the head, auditory senses in the head, walks upright and basically, climbs around and does what human beings would do. And apparently, as we've gone through the title, Stranger in Paradise, is he has somehow transplanted the mind of this son into the robot and discovered that the son seems to have a mind that is more adept at the circumstances on Mercury. Well, that was lucky. That was useful. And I guess in whatever manner anything of him exists in this computer, I guess that's kind of lucky for him too. So that's another, so that's the stranger in paradise. But he's got this now functioning robot. It works from Earth. We guide it. We do all the intensive thinking about it. In a large computer here, human beings can generally guide it, but the large computer is its brain. But it has to transmit stuff to Mercury, which can take some hours for the signal to get from here to Mercury, or its observation to be reported from Mercury to Earth. Now, in hindsight, I'm looking at this. I've worked with a lot of materials along these kinds of lines. And if this had been the case, I would have designed it as you put the big computer in orbit around Mercury, where, maybe even I don't know, you're looking at a time they may or may not be aware that Mercury rotates at all. But, or you could have something in a geostationary orbit around Mercury, over more or less whatever spot the robot will be functioning. And it talks to the computer in orbit. Computer, it gets the sensations virtually immediately, and it can report its desired actions almost immediately. And then the computer would, in a less frequent and whatever manner, communicate to Earth. It would report back. We could give it some general directions like explore this other pathway, or it's time for another spectrographic analysis of sort. Do some mineral analysis here with this different colored rock we just saw. And it may take a while, but it would say, yes, I can do that. Because the computer in orbit would have all the brains it takes to do that, and the one that's local can finish the job. But that would probably not necessitate the personality engrams, if you will, of the autistic child of the older of these brothers. So, I don't know. Personally, I find it kind of a rather tedious read. On reading it twice, once in the original magazine, and then once again in the book into which the story is collected. And other than the loss of artwork and blurbs, I don't seem to discern any difference in the way the story is presented between the two sources. I don't know. I found it a rather grueling read. Some of the apparently this was one story that even two very good editor friends of Asimov's rejected. One rejected it, another rejected it. Finally, he sends it to If, which has a young new editor. The editor found it worth printing, and Asimov goes through these rather considerable self-doubts. He writes about this to give me the background of the story. He saw how this maybe the editor was kind of new and inexperienced, and just wow, the great Asimov sending me a story, and he hasn't written very many stories. This is special. Of course, I'm gonna print it, even if it's crap. It is not an easy read, and it's like I had to go through it a couple times before I kind of understood what was going on. And even then, I don't know if the reward justifies what it takes to get through. So I can I can very much appreciate why the two editors turned it down. But also, as he points out, apparently the third editor wasn't exactly wrong either. It does have some interesting features, and at the time it might have seemed like a reasonable way to do things. So there it is. Another story about two brothers, not twins separated at birth, but just simply family brothers, which I guess in a society in which even that is unheard of, separated as young children, and going entirely different ways, now suddenly having to work together and ultimately being able to discover their abilities together. So, You can watch that happen. It's just their whole prejudice against each other's similarity to each other. It's just kind of an odd theme that just rings false. At least in the original one, Heredity, the two brothers had simply been separated. One's a city boy, lived in the city, learns all higher education and knows some useful mathematics. You see, the other one's a country boy out on some farm in Ganymede. You know, even talks and sounds like a country hick would have been expected to sound, at least the way a young, rising writing star, such as Asimov was, would have in his mind pictured some country hick being. Okay, so which was also kind of clumsy then, but I think it had more realism than here this one now. But watching them find their ways to work together, mate together their substantially different skills into the success of a project, kind of makes it worth it. And the bit about taking care of the autistic son by, in effect, programming him into a computer that's going to be walking a robot around on Mars. I mean, Mercury. Okay, that's a project, and I guess that's kind of a redeeming detail. He's he's the stranger in paradise. Well, there it is. For what it's worth. I haven't left any spoilers in this case. Thanks for watching.